All right, welcome back to SoundOff Central Lightbar Programming. This is going to be video number 2, and in this video we're going to cover how to actually build your lightbar. So I'm going to go ahead and head back to Setup, and we are looking at an mPower lightbar. I'm actually going to build this one out, and then we're going to go through and do the detection process of detecting a lightbar. Building one from scratch is actually pretty easy to do. The first thing you want to do is toggle this button where it says Manual. And when you do that, it's going to ask you, the different settings for the light bar. So right now we're on an mPower light bar. What do we want? What size is it? So if it's got 4-inch modules or 6-inch modules, you can pick the different bar sizes. So if I had a 48-inch, 6-inch module, there you go. It's going to set that up for me. And depending on the light bar you choose, like let's say it's an Enforce NXT, we go back to manual. It asks how big is the bar. So I could have up to a 72-inch or all the way down to a 24-inch. Let's go back to that mPower lightbar. So how it works is you basically just click on a module and tell it what color it is. So if this module was like a red-white, so we've got a dual color module with red and white in it. Great, it's set. Let's go ahead and do the next module. And we can just repeat this process, but we do have some tricks that speed up the whole process. You can actually take draw a box around specific modules, and you can assign things that way. You can also, I'm going to go ahead and click this button, which clears my selection. You can also hold down Control and select multiple modules at the same time, but very specific modules. So if you wanted to go that route, you could do that. So I'm going to go ahead and pick everything on the corner here. And these are going to be red, white. But now we're looking at down here at this section here where we've selected our colors, and notice we've got dotted boxes on the red and on the white. Well, what that represents is some of the modules have red in it, but not all of the modules have red. And the same thing for the white. So I'm going to go ahead and click red. It's going to take the red out. I'm going to click it one more time, and now it's applied it to all 3. Do the same thing over here for white. Take them out, apply it to all 3. Super simple, right? I'm going to go back to just nothing. Same thing here. And we'll just start this whole process over. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to build out a bar that's red, white, and blue, white to the front, and it's red, amber, and blue, amber to the rear. And I'm going to show you how quickly you can do this. I'm going to drag a box. I'm going to get all of these modules here. And I'm going to say they're all red, white. Yes, we're going to come back and hit those rear ones here in a second. Then I'm going to grab all of these modules over here, and I'm going to say they're blue, white. So now we can go back to these rear modules here, and I'm going to go ahead and highlight all of them. And again, it's showing dotted red and dotted blue, but white's in all of them. Well, what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to uncheck white and recheck amber. And there we go. Our light bar is now laid out. We've got the color layout set up for this particular light bar. So the next step is to move to this next tab. So right now we're on the Create tab, and you've got automatic and manual. We're covering the manual process right now. The Create tab is where we design all of this functionality as far as what color is actually in each position. Then we go into the Function tab, and this is where we can start telling the light bar to do certain things when certain triggers are sent. This is actually pretty simple and fairly easy to do. What I typically recommend is select what the function is that you want. So in this case, I want takedown. Pick the modules you want to be part of the takedown. There we go. I've got those picked. And then tell it what color. And it's only going to show you colors that are common to both modules. So notice that one has red, one has blue. So it's not showing the red or the blue in this case. It's only showing the white. So I'm going to go ahead and click white. All right, next one. Let's go to scene. Do the same thing. I'm going to highlight all these front ones here this time. Click white. Let's do our alley scene at the same time. Notice how the alleys already have white assigned. If your alley has white in it, it's going to automatically get assigned to the alley scene function, but I'm going to grab the whole corner. So I'm going to grab this one over here, and I'm going to hold Control down and grab this one over here. And now white is my only option because it's present on both sides, and it's telling me that some modules already have the white done and some don't. I'm just going to uncheck it, recheck it. Now all my corners are handled. Let's go ahead and do arrow. Grab all these modules on the back. Amber. Done. If you're in like California and you have Title 13, you need a steady type function. Let's grab a single red up here and maybe a single blue at the same time, and we'll set those to steady. Now, this is one of those cases where I want one red and one blue, and it's not going to let me select that. So I need to do these one at a time. So let's just do the blue and then the red. If you needed a second scene function, you can do that. Cruise mode. What modules do we want to cruise? Let's do the corners. So I'm going to grab these blue ones over here, tell them to do blue. And I'm going to grab the red ones over here, tell them to do red. Now, at the bottom of the cruise mode section, we have the ability to set our duty cycle. You can go from 1 up to 10%. You can just kind of slide that back and forth, or you can click on it and it will go up and down by 1 at a time. I find 7 to 8% seems to be like the perfect number. And then we have the ability to do what's called flash over cruise. So flash over cruise is a function where the pattern will flash and the cruise won't shut off. So it'll be cruising kind of in the background. So when it's turned off, like it is right now, when you activate cruise mode, you're going to get your cruise lights. But when you turn on your flash mode, the cruise lights turn off. If you want those cruise mode lights to continue running while the flash mode's happening, make sure that that's toggled on. And you can have one on cruise 1, and you can do it differently on cruise 2 if you wanted to go that route. Stop, tail, turn. That's 2 different buttons down here. So we've got stop and tail. Now, we're going to talk about this one here for a second. Stop and tail allows you to do like a, maybe this module here, I want it to be my red brake function. And I have 2 different triggers in IO mapping, one for stop, so I can have a high intensity, and one for tail, which is a lower intensity, or like a parking light intensity. And then we could do maybe our turn signals. Let's grab the turn one here, and let's grab both of these inboard 2s, and we'll say amber on both of them. Okay. Now, there is a caveat to these functions here. This requires a universal breakout box to utilize this, with stop and tail being different modules or different colors. If you're not using a universal breakout box, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that for a second. It's going to give me a warning that, hey, some of these functions aren't going to work. And it's going to say, do you want to set the incompatible features to defaults? I'm going to go ahead and click no in this case, and notice that it didn't do anything. So let's go ahead and try this again. Click yes. And this time it took the stop, tail, and made it stop, tail, and turn. And notice that it doesn't have a color assigned to it at all. But if we click on this one module here, it's still assigned to red. So this was now going to act as a stop, a tail, and a turn function. And when it does the turn function, this is on the left side of the bar, so the bar knows it's left from its right. So this would only work when you do the left rear turn signal. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the universal breakout box. We'll separate these back out. Notice how it keeps certain things for you. So as long as the application's open, all of this information is stored in the application. It's not stored in the save file, it's just stored in our session. All right, continuing along, we have our low power modes. So low power works like this. If you click on low power 1, by default, all modules are assigned to low power 1. So when I select all modules, it's showing that they're on. Let's select just this one module, turn it off. Actually, let's grab the whole rear of the bar. Let's turn it off there. All right, so now if I grab all these, it's showing that I've got some that are on and some that are off. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to low power 2 and only do the rear of the bar, set that to on. So low power 1 is basically 270 degrees, and low power 2 is just the rear facing stuff of the light bar. Now low power also has a duty cycle setting, just like cruise mode. When you click on it, it's 1 at a time, but if you grab the slider, you can go up quite a bit faster than that. Notice that if we get below 50%, you do get a warning to make sure you check your state compliance requirements. Some states do have requirements, or SAE requirements, for brightness, and at 50%, we're at that minimum threshold. Now, if you're using an exterior light bar, you're going to have an option for photo sensor, and you can basically say it's active or inactive, and you can tell it what your sensitivity is and how long you want it to wait before activating. So basically, this is saying if it gets less than 50, the photo sensor is currently active. But this is saying it has to be less than 50 for more than 30 seconds. And then the other way around, once you're coming back towards daytime, it has to get greater than 300. And it's talking about lux as far as a brightness unit. And it would have to be over that 300 for 30 seconds. I find in most areas of the country, these settings are actually perfect. But if you do live in an area where you have a lot of tunnels and you want low power to trigger when you're going inside of tunnels, you might want to start playing around with your delay time. Now, this particular trigger, the photo cell, doesn't do anything by default. You have to actually map it to do stuff. So in IO mapping, it's got its own input card right there. All right, so that pretty much covers the functions section. Let's go into the patterns. So patterns work in a very similar way. You select the module, and then we're going to jump down to here. You're going to select a pattern for those modules. So let's go ahead and go with Quint. We're going to select Quint, and then you can basically say for the left, what color do I want it to do? So you have red, and for the right, what color do you want it? We have blue. All right, that's the basics, but now let's go into a little bit more detail and some of the other functionality you can do with this. Odds are you're probably going to be programming a lot of modules at the same time. So I'm going to grab the whole light bar, and notice how it's highlighted in yellow now. That's indicating that not all modules have the same pattern on them. So I'm going to go ahead and put these all to Quint at this point. I'm going to say they're all red on the driver's side and they're all blue on the passenger side. And you have all the same exact ways of selecting modules. So like before, where you select one module, you would click on it, you hold control down, you can click another module, get another module, or you can drag a box around several. One thing I do want to point out is when I select a module on one side, it automatically selects that same module on the other side. And that's because our flash patterns always work in pairs. Now, additionally, we have arrow modes. So when you click on this, it's going to automatically highlight your arrows, and it's going to say what pattern do you want the arrow to be. Now, when it's in this all position, that means it's going to affect all modes. And we're going to come back and talk about the modes here in a second. But when it's in the single position, it means it's only going to affect the mode that's currently selected. So if I'm on mode 1 and I want mode 1 to be a little bit different than everything else, I could go through and maybe change these all to single fast or something like that. And then if we have takedowns that have already been configured, it will show up here. You can basically say, hey, when I turn on the flashing takedowns function, this is the pattern I want. You just go down the list here and pick whatever you want it to be. Now let's go back to the warning mode. You have the ability to change the phasing of individual modules if you want to. So an example would be when you flash lights on a SoundOff light bar, they always flash by default left side and then right side. But if you wanted to make it like do an inside-outside pattern, you could change that up by playing around with some of the phasing. And what we could do is we could basically say on the first phase, which is always the driver's side, we want these ones here on the passenger side to shine on that first phase. So what we can do is we can go over to the passenger side and change the phase swap on it. And then we can do the exact same thing for these middle ones, but this time we're going to do the left side. And now this pattern right here is going to flash these modules here and these modules at the same time, and then it's going to flash all your inboard modules at the same time. So that's how that phase swap functionality works. Now let's talk about some of these other functions down here, like the modes. What are the modes? Well, each one of these modes could represent a different flash pattern. So when we get into the mapping, you can take a mode and turn mode 1 on, or mode 1's on by default, but you can have mode 2 get triggered, and when it gets triggered, I could have it do something completely different. Like, let's give it a different pattern. Let's use inner cycle. And we're going to say that mode 2 is going to flash red on the driver's side, and it's going to flash blue on the passenger side. And if we wanted to make modifications to the arrow or the takedowns, we could do that specifically for mode 2. We can get even more in depth with this. Let's go to mode 3. Now, up to this point, we've been flashing a single color on each side of the light bar. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into like dual or tricolors. One way to sort those out is when you have this middle selector here as set to color count all, that means this pattern list is huge. It's got lots of patterns in single, dual, and tri. And the D or the T, that basically means that it's dual color, and the S means it's a single color. So if I change this to show dual only, now we're only going to see the dual color patterns in the list. So let's pick double dual, all right? And we're going to say for the first flash, we want it to be red. Second flash is white. And then maybe we'll do white on this one and blue on this one. All right. And now we've set it up. And notice how it's not doing anything to the rear, because the rear doesn't have that amber functionality in it. So these are only going to flash as if they were a single color, those rear modules, because we don't have anything amber selected. If we wanted to change those up, we could just come back down to these and we could change those specifically to do like maybe our ambers in here if we wanted to. All right, so let's go back to this next filter over here. We have pattern filters. So basically, if the pattern is compliant with SAE, or is it compliant with the European ECE standards, or is it a California Title 13 pattern? And then we also have our new patterns, the Aura patterns. They're all filterable by clicking on these different buttons. So if I look at these Aura patterns, it's only going to show our Aura patterns. If I want to look at just SAE, now I'm looking at just SAE patterns. California Title 13, there we go. We've got our California Title 13. So we have two other things that I want to talk about on the screen. I'm going to go to mode 7. And I'm going to clear my selection. We're going to talk about what an override mode is. So normally when you have a mode active, like mode 1 is active, it's flashing any light that's currently active is going to flash at mode 1. If you shift to mode 2, any light that is currently active is going to be now on mode 2. So that means if you had some, like maybe you had mode 1 flashing these corners, and we decided in mode 2 we're going to add those to it, and we're talking about once we get into IO mapping, the corners are still flashing because maybe it's a slide 1 and a slide 2. So the corners could still be flashing. But when we shift mode 2, it's going to affect every module that's currently flashing. So that also means that the corners will get added to that. So if you want to flash let's go to mode 7 here. If we wanted a specific function or a specific pattern type override for special scenarios that doesn't affect every single light on the light bar, we only want to affect like a specific set of lights, we can do what's called an override mode. And when we turn that on, it will now say which lights do you want to be affected when the override mode is active. And I'm going to go ahead and say I want all the rears to do something different. And so now we've selected the modules to say we want them to be part of the override mode, but we still need to set the patterns. So we can still, at this point, we can set the patterns on this light to do something different. Like this one could do, let's just leave it at random 1. And then these inboards, we could have those override with maybe slow runner. Don't forget, we have to set that color. If we don't set the color, they will override and not do anything. If I have a light bar active and the whole light bar is going, and I trigger mode 7, let's say the whole light bar is going in mode 2, and I trigger mode 7. These rear modules are going to do what mode 7 says to do, and the rest of the lights are going to continue doing the mode 2 stuff they were doing before. Now, the very last thing I want to show you is what's called drift. So let's go to mode 4. Drift is a function that allows, a pattern or a set of lights that are all in the same pattern. Like let's grab all these rears here and let's say they're all on, let's do something a little slower so it would be obvious. So maybe they're all on double, red, and blue. What'll happen is when these turn on, or when mode 4 turns on and these happen to be active at the same time, these are going to all flash the double pattern, but they're going to start to break up. They're not going to stay in full synchronization. So that's what that drift function does. Now, if you want to look at like a summary of everything you've already set up, click on this summary here, and it allows you to look at like mode 1, everything about mode 1. So you can see which modules, what patterns, what color, if it's a single color, if it's got a dual color, what's the second color, if it's tricolor, what's the third color you're flashing, if you have any kind of phase swap going on. And it does the same thing for the right side. So this is the left side and this is the right side. And you can see that for every mode. So if I want to go look at mode 7, there we go. I can see everything for that. That is basic setup of light bars. Let's go back to create, and we're going to go and start a new file. And I'm going to change this to an mPower traffic controller. Hit upload. I just want to change my breakout box type. And we're going to cover how to detect modules. Okay, so now that we have the mPower traffic controller selected, what I can do is click on detect modules. And it's going to basically start talking through the universal breakout box directly to the modules of the light bar. And it's going to say, hey, what color are you? What position are you in? When we click the detect, it's going to start this process. Now I am connected to an mPower traffic controller. But for this to work, your breakout box has to be powered up, has to have power and ground. And your light bar also has to have power and ground. And then the data wire between the two has to be connected. And this is what it looks like when you don't actually have the light bar or something's not connected, you're going to get this error warning that says, hey, there doesn't appear to be a light bar connected. I actually had my power supply disconnected purposely, so we're going to go ahead and go through this process again. I'm going to speed it up this time around. All right, now there it goes. It detected our bar for us, and then it also gave me a warning, basically saying that it only detected one of the connected light bars. So certain light bar types can support 2 bars on the same breakout box. The M-Power traffic controller is one of those. Once we get to this point, we can basically say, all right, cool, we got everything set up. This is a front light bar. Notice how it's kind of towards the front. Or it could be a left light bar. It just depends. We're going to configure that here in a second, but it detected these for us. Now, if this is a front light bar and I wanted my red on the driver's side, I can hit this button right here that says rotate upper bar. And what it's going to do is it's going to reconfigure the bar for me and all the modules so that it's set up so that red is now on the driver's side. And when it comes to installing this is just a matter of, flipping the light bar over one way or the other. But driver's side and passenger side matters for things like turn signals and stuff like that. All right, so we are flipped now. Okay, so I'm going to go into manual setup at this point, and now I can tell it what my orientation is. So I'm either a front and rear or a left and right. I'm using a front and rear in this case. And then it's going to say how many modules are on the front. Well, it detected it as a 6. So as long as you've got 6, you're in good shape. And if we don't have anything connected to the rear, like I don't, it's going to detect it as none. And then everything else moving forward is the same. The functions, the patterns, you're just going to go through and set them all up in the same way. So let's jump into I/O mapping. This actually goes pretty quickly. Actually, let's go back to setup and let's put our serial controls in. Go back to I/O mapping. So how does I/O mapping work? Well, really all it is point and click. I click on button 1. What do I want button 1 to be? Well, the default for button 1 is my arrow function. So I'm just going to go ahead and scroll down. It's a triple press button. So I'm going to tell this one to turn on my left rear arrow, and single button arrow is the second press of that. So that's to turn on my right rear arrow. And then maybe my button 2 is going to be my takedowns. So just turn those on. Button 3, left alley. Button 4, right alley. Maybe button 5 is my cruise mode. That's kind of down towards the bottom. Let's turn on cruise here. Button 6 might not even be a light bar function. 7 may not be a light bar function. And then 8 is usually a gun lock on most of the 480s. Let's set up 7 or 6. Let's set that up as our scene. So that way it's right under our takedown button. That's a scene 1. And then we can just jump down to like the siren. What do I want it to do on level 1? So here's an example of this. Level 1, I want to do all my rears. Now, granted, I don't have a rear light bar connected here. So that just means I'm sending commands to a bar that doesn't exist, which means it's not going to do anything. But if you're using like a full-size light bar, like an M-Power or something like that, this would turn on only the rear modules. And maybe level 2, I'm going to add my fronts in. Now you can click on them again to turn them on, but if your siren controller is set up to progressive, most cases you just need to add them in. And maybe we're going to change our light bar pattern on mode 2. So when level 2 is on, mode 2 is on. And then we go to level 3. And again, if we're using a progressive controller, all of this is going because of level 1 and level 2's triggers. So really all you have to do is maybe say mode 3 is turning on. Now, if you did have corners, they would be turned on here, but we're not actually programming a light bar with corners. We're doing an M-Power traffic controller. And we have all of our other functions down here. Like if you wanted to use takedown flash, you can use this. This is a specific function just to flash the takedowns with no other color. But I kind of built my mode 3 to include dual color. So it's flashing red and white and blue and white. So I'm not going to use this takedown flash function. If you've got any scene functionality, it's going to be in here. Anything that's arrow control is in there. And as we scroll down, it's kind of broken down by section. Stop, tail, turn functions, those are all here. So let's do a wire for turn signal. So go back to setup. I'm going to add wires into the system. Go back to mapping. And maybe I'm going to use my blue-white wire to be my left turn signal. So if I go down to my turn signals, I'm going to have it turn on my left front and my left rear. So if my light bar had turn configured on the front, it's going to react to it. Now that M-Power bar we designed earlier did not have turn assigned on the front. When we went through and did everything in this functions tab, we never actually picked a front module and said, hey, when it's on turn, do this color. So what this means is when you have that wire active, It's going to send the command to the front, but because the front wasn't configured with it, the front's just not going to react to it. But the rear was configured on that mPower we built, so that one would turn on. And we can do the same thing for the right side, just turn those on. So you get the idea of how the mapping works. Really what we're doing is we're sending commands to the light modules themselves, and the light modules are turning on or they're turning off. Now, one more thing about these different inputs is you can set priority between 1 and 5. This allows you to basically say certain inputs are going to override others. So if I had another input for like a part kill or something like that, maybe this is a part kill wire going to the light bar, I could have part kill maybe turn off mode 3, and let's just set it to priority 4. All the priorities are 3 by default, so just setting this one to 4 means it's going to override any other input on the system that's turning on mode 3. And then you also have the ability to set your voltage, so you can do positive or ground trigger. And finally, you can set the threshold. So if you're on positive, you can say it has to be greater than 8 volts, or if you're on ground, you have to say it's it's less than 1.8 volts. And that's basically how it works, and you can adjust those. Most of the time, leaving them where they stand is probably going to do what you need them to do. Finally, we're going to talk about these other inputs down here a little bit later. We'll cover that in the next video, basically, how does speed sense work and how do the matrices work. All right, so that's going to be it for this video. So in the next video, we're going to cover matrices, and we're going to design a matrix, and then we're going to map it. And then we're also going to do the same thing for speed sense. We're going to set speed sense to change our patterns for us at faster speeds. And then we'll go into control simulator and diagnostics.